Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our Lean Startup webcast. Today's topic is Lean Product Management. I'm Felicia Chenko, Production Manager of Lean Startup Company. Lean Startup Week is 1 month away. If you're planning on joining us in San Francisco, grab your pass before October 15th to stay with our fall sale. Our speaker today is Bruce McCarthy, CEO of Up Labs and President of the Boston Product Management Association. Moderating is Dan Olsen, Senior Faculty Member with the Lean Startup Company Education Program. You can catch these speakers during Lean Startup Week on November 1st, conducting workshops. Bruce will be giving a workshop about lean product roadmaps, setting direction while embracing uncertainty. Dan's will be about a playbook for achieving product market fit. You can also catch both Bruce and Dan at our Meet the Authors book signing during lunchtime on November 3rd. You can find more information at 2017.leanstartup.co. A few housekeeping notes. We'll be taking questions from the audience via the live chat. If you'd like to ask a question, please flag it by starting with a Q: before your question. We're raffling off a silver pass to Lean Startup Week. For a chance to win, simply add to the chat conversation with a question or a comment during the broadcast. This will be a 45-minute program, and the recording will be available after this live webcast. Take it away, Dan.
Great. Thanks a lot, Felicia. It's a real pleasure to be here today with Bruce McCarthy. And as you mentioned, we're both giving a workshop, so I thought we'd each just could give a quick overview of our workshop for people that are interested. So I'm giving a 2-hour workshop where, as you mentioned, I'm going to be sharing top advice from my book, The Lean Product Playbook, on how to achieve product market fit. And Bruce, I know you're doing an awesome new workshop. Can you tell people about it?
Yeah, it's also a 2-hour workshop. This one is about lean product road mapping. It's based on my new book, Product Roadmaps Relaunched, How to Set Direction While Embracing Uncertainty. The basic idea is that roadmaps have become kind of unpopular over the past few years because people sort of assume that with lean and agile methods, they're not really necessary, or that they might actually be over planning. But in fact, there's still a hunger for setting the strategic direction and some of the major steps along the way of getting there. So what we've done is developed a methodology we can share in the workshop and walk people through that allows you to set that direction, set that vision, get everybody on the same page without over-promising or over-planning.
Great, yeah, and since your new book's about road mapping, and since that's a hot topic for product manager, I think that's what we're going to try to focus on today. And I think we're going to start out by talking about what are the top road mapping mistakes that we see product teams and companies make. And I guess the first is just even presuming that they have one. Not every team has one. So what are some of the reasons why teams don't have one in your experience?
Well, you're absolutely right. That I'd say that is the #1 mistake. That's sort of the base level mistake, is that they sort of say that they don't think that they need one, or that they're not sure how to put one together, so they just sort of put it off and don't do it. I think the #1 reason is probably fear of overpromising, of being wrong. They realize that their strategy is going to evolve. They realize that they're going to go down some directions that are not going to pan out, and they're going to have to pivot and go down other directions. And their idea of a product roadmap is a series of features and dates. So that if the features and the dates are going to change, why put them on paper? One of the guys I talked to interviewing for the book was David Cancel, CEO of Drift. And he said, if I deliver on what I thought was the right thing 9 months ago, but I've since learned better, then I'm going to disappoint you by delivering the wrong thing. And if I don't deliver on what I thought was the right thing 9 months ago when I promised it to you, well, then I've lied to you. So people seem to be caught in the fear of one of those two bad outcomes, when in fact what's really needed is a better road mapping process that doesn't put you in that dilemma.
Yeah, I guess it's safer to not make any public commitment than to make a commitment and then miss it, because as we know, product management, product development, there's a lot of uncertainty, and so that desire to have kind of certainty and dates can cause a problem. I think the other thing I've seen in my experience working with teams is just most teams just tend to focus overly on the short term. And I think that, as you mentioned, agile methods are great if, hey, what are we doing the next 2 weeks? And so I think that a lot of teams just never pull themselves out of the trenches of the day-to-day and give themselves permission or think about looking out a quarter, 2 quarters, a year out into the future. And I think the other thing that you mentioned is just a lot of teams, like if no one in your organization is experiencing creating good work roadmaps, or hasn't worked in a place where they've seen how it's done well, like why would they know how to do so? It's like, do you even have the expectation that you should be thinking long term and are you able to pull yourself away from the day-to-day to do it?
I think that's the toughest thing. In fact, for the longest time, whenever I talk to product managers and I ask them what's their number one challenge, they've always said that I get so bogged down in the details that I don't have time to think strategically. And it's not a new problem with lean and agile methods, but it's an important one to overcome. You need to carve out that time. And a road mapping exercise is actually a perfect excuse and a perfect scaffolding, if you're doing it right, for that strategic conversation that forces you to think longer term, that forces you to think, all right, we're iterating, but where are we iterating? And can I get the rest of the organization on board with a single direction that not only can we execute on in the product development team, but marketing is on board, and sales is on board, and channels, resellers, et cetera, they're on board, and the executive team is on board, and the board is on board, so to speak. Getting everybody on the same page about the plan is at least as important as what the plan is.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely, and it's an exercise in getting people on board. And the other thing is, I guess, even if, say, you're up for doing it, you may just feel like, I just don't have time to do it. It's going to take too long. Like, the stakeholders aren't going to make the time. You know, what it just made me think of is the same kind of dilemma between discovery and delivery, right? We're so busy delivering, we don't have time to do discovery. And I think that's part of why design sprints are so popular. It's like, hey, it's just 5 days.
That's right.
Just follow this recipe for 5 days. And you can certainly carve out 5 days, right? So if we had kind of a common, if people had their head around, hey, just this road mapping exercise is only going to take so many hours or so many days to do, it might feel more approachable or doable, you know?
Yeah, we're going to talk about actually 2 different ways to approach this problem in the workshop. One of them is the one you suggested. It's a workshop approach. You set a limited time period with your core stakeholders and you lock yourselves in a room, but not for weeks on end, you know, right. 5 days, 3 days, 2 days, whatever you can carve out, but everybody focuses with their phones off on what is it that that we're heading for, what is the big picture, and what are the main problems we need to solve along the way. Another method, actually, we talk about when it's hard to get those people all in the same room at the same time, or when there's a lot of politics and posturing, say, among the key stakeholders that all want to be smarter than everybody else, is what I call shuttle diplomacy, where you as the product person make the rounds one-on-one to each people who you expect to be around the table at your eventual roadmap meeting. And you agree with them on their agenda and what's important to them. You make them feel heard. You get them to feel a sense of authorship in whatever the plan is that's slowly emerging from that process. And then when you do sit down and have the group discussion, it can be much shorter because you've already got everybody's input, and you're more likely to be successful and get the egos to not be in the way because everybody feels already bought into whatever it is you're bringing to the table at that point.
Yeah, I think that approach of the pre-meeting one-on-ones to kind of get alignment before you just, I mean, if you're bringing like 8 to 10 stakeholders together for the first time in the room, the probability of chaos ensuing is pretty high. Yeah. And I call that technique, I use that in general, not even for roadmaps, just concentric circle approach, where it's like, okay, who's my number one stakeholder? Let me go have a one-on-one with them, get them on the same page, and then who's my next 1 or 2 key stakeholders, and kind of bring the circles out. And then by the time you get the whole group in, hopefully you've got enough alignment. So.
Right, no, it's the same idea.
Yeah. Cool. And then I think the other thing that's helpful, I know I talk about this in my talks, I think you're familiar with too, to help people kind of realize that, hey, we're really focused on the short term, and how if we don't make time for the long term, like we'll execute these 2-week sprints, and then after 6 months or 12 months, we'll look back and we'll have remorse that we didn't get some key thing done. Is the whole thing from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the big rocks versus the pebbles in the sand. And if you haven't seen that video, I'd encourage the viewers to watch it. It's really powerful. I remember the first time I saw it. Basically, he has a jar, like a glass jar, and he asks the person to fill it up, and he has these big rocks, these pebbles in the sand. And the first time the woman puts all the sand in, then she puts the pebbles in, and there's not enough room for the big rocks. Right. And he's like, please do it again. And then she does it the second time. She puts the big rocks in, then the pebbles, and the sand actually fits all around. There's no trick. It's the same volume of stuff.
Right.
But the idea for product roadmaps or just your product execution is that, you know, those big rocks, Agile is really good at sand. Yeah. Doing those user stories, getting those bugs, taking that meeting, answering that email, right? Responding to that customer request. That's all the sand that will occupy your day and fill your jar if you don't carve out the big rocks, which are like, hey, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, What are the things that really are important to achieve our business objectives?
Well, exactly right. And I see this problem a lot. It's as you say, it's very easy to do something that feels good, adds value, and is achievable in a 2-week sprint. But you have to ask yourself, when you take the time to step back and look at the bigger picture, what are the most important things that if we don't do them this year, we're screwed? And one way to do that is to first have a product vision exercise. Mm-hmm. What is the purpose of us even having this product? Why are we building it? What do we expect will be the change in the world, the benefit to the world if we do this, and if we do this correctly? Great. So we have an objective in mind. Let's actually work backwards from there and think of what are the big rocks, the big boulders we need to move, the big problems we need to solve. What at a high level needs to be true for us to have succeeded in achieving that vision? Those things form the biggest boulders in your roadmap. And you need to make sure that those are in there before you start packing in any sand or smaller pebbles, right? Because otherwise it's all pebbles.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like to, I think a metaphor sometimes, I think about like a sailing metaphor. And it's like, Agile lets you kind of sail a certain distance in 2 weeks, but how you know you're going in the right direction. And so that product vision that you mentioned, I think helps. Obviously that direction is going to change a little bit, but if you don't know what direction you're heading in, then you're just kind of compass is spinning as you're going from sprint to sprint, and you may not be kind of making progress towards that important overall vision that you talked about.
Is good. I like the analogy of waves. So the destination is fixed. You tell it, I need to be at Copley Plaza at a certain time. But it's constantly revising the route as you go based on conditions. And you can even force it periodically to give me some more options because I'm hitting traffic. And it does. So in the end, you're just trying to map the most efficient route, and that's fine. And that's what you're doing in your agile sprints and in your lean experiments. You're trying to find out what is working, but what is working to get us toward a vision. And you've got to take the time to define that up front is the main thing.
Yeah, it sounds like a killer app. Ways for product roadmaps. That'd be great. Just it tells you the fastest route. You put in where you want. Hey, we want 20% profitability. What's the fastest route? Should I take the 101 or the 280? It sounds great.
This sounds like a product idea.
Killer app. Sounds good. Well, I know the other thing that we both talk a lot and is we see with roadmaps is the whole solution space versus problem space thing, and how like a lot of times the roadmaps will be specifying solutions or features. And then the team will like execute on that, and then they'll realize afterwards that, wow, it didn't actually, solve the problem that we were trying to solve. So do you have any observations or tips on that front?
I do. So I think we've hit on, not having a roadmap is the #1 problem, and not having a product vision that says this is the direction we're going in is #2. And #3, and a close follow-on in that, is confusing a roadmap, a strategic roadmap, with a project plan or a release plan that is really specific about dates and deliverables. That's not what really a product roadmap is. If you think about who cares about a product roadmap, it's the executive team, it's the other departments, sales and marketing, it's the board of directors, it's your customers and your channel partners. They don't care precisely what date and what feature, really. What they really care about is that you are solving the right problems, that you are adding value to them. Internal people care that you're adding value to the company. Customers, you're adding value to their lives by solving problems for them. The board of directors, it's just a higher level of adding value to the company. The channel, that you're going to have great things that people are going to want for them to sell. So that really is, if you keep the conversation at that high level, at that what problems do we need to solve for the market level, those things don't change nearly as quickly as what features or other kinds of things you might deliver, what deliverables are going to actually solve those problems. That's what you're iterating on when you're doing agile sprints or lean experiments, is you're iterating on whether or not a particular thing that you're building actually solves the problem successfully. So leave the planning about resources and dependencies and precise dates and implementations to that project plan, and have the roadmap focused at the problem space, rather than the solution space. Have it have it focused on outcomes rather than output. And that's going to change much less frequently. What problems you're pointed at, what problems exist in the market, that doesn't have weekly churn the way an agile sprint does.
Definitely, yeah. And in my framework, the product market fit pyramid, we've got the 2 layers of the market: who your target customers and what needs are you trying to solve for them. And the top 3, the product, I always point out exactly as you did, like those needs don't change. Like the need to listen to music on the go doesn't change as quickly as the technology solutions that come and go.
Right.
And so when I think of a roadmap, you know, the way it's typically structured is you've got time going across the horizontal, and you've got some kind of swim lanes or themes. And just to tie it back to what we're saying, I see people just putting in like features as the swim lanes or themes. And I think what we're trying to say is, no, you should have like customer problem areas as your themes. Like, okay, we're going to try to make this thing easier for customers. And then you can actually, so I think that's what's important. And then I guess it's okay as a team, once you've identified what you think the top feature ideas to execute and deliver on those are, you can deploy those in boxes on the time map, on the timeline. And I think what you said is key, is that the main thing that matters is the sequentiality, the sequence. Okay, we're going to do this before this, and less like, oh, this is going to be done on October 1st. And if it's not, then, oh my gosh, the world's going to end.
Right. Well, it depends on what you're focused on. You can manage to dates, or you can manage to solving the problem. I prefer managing to solving the problem, but sometimes there are external factors you need to acknowledge. There's a regulatory event happening. There's some new regulation that takes place or takes effect on October 1st, and we have to comply. And it's as simple as that. Or there's a trade show we're planning on demoing at. We got to have something to show. Maybe it's not actually shipping on that date, but we got to have something to show. Those things do. Or you're in enterprise software and you've got a contractual obligation with one of your 100 customers. Or 60 customers or something like that. Those are understandable, but the basic structure that you described is exactly what we describe in the book and what we'll go through in the workshop. Is start with the vision, and then go to the themes of the big problems you need to solve in order to achieve that vision. And then you can have additional detail about features, but I would tend for an external audience like a customer only to include those when you're sure. When you've validated that those are the right features, that they really do solve that problem, and that you really can ship it in some meaningful time frame. If you're really not sure of any of those factors, time, or whether it's the right feature, or whether you're going to be able to implement it effectively from a technical standpoint, then just stick with the theme. The challenge, and I know product managers will say this, they will say, well, sure, but I've always got some stakeholder that says, okay, great. I get it. You're on my side. You're solving my problems. But I want to know, are you going to ship my favorite feature, yes or no? And are you going to do it this year? And I always tell them, just don't answer that question. Turn it around and say, tell me why you want that feature. Tell me why it's important to you. And then have a really good open discussion about whether particular approaches to solving that problem, including theirs, are adequate from their point of view. If they feel like you're hearing them and listening to the why behind the specific request, then you can probably leave the room without actually making a promise.
Yeah, as you said, there certainly are times when there are real deadlines, like a trade show or something like that. I feel like there's that, one of the things I hate is arbitrary deadlines, like when people just say, oh, it's got to be done by next Friday, and you're pointing out like the desire for a lot of stakeholders to do that, basically. And the other thing you pointed out is like internal versus external, like kind of like, and I've seen a lot of my consulting clients, we'll actually have kind of 2 versions of reality. We'll have the internal version that we, the team, it goes further out, the dates are a little more aggressive and things like that. And then there's kind of like, okay, how do you know, in sales team, if you don't create an internal version, the sales team can often grab that and be like, look, and show it. And then the whole product is like, no, don't tell them that we're planning to have that done, because there's a lot of uncertainty, especially the farther you go out. So a lot of them will create internal roadmaps where it's like, okay, we're not going as far out. We're being a little fuzzier on the exact time frame. Do you have any tips for kind of internal versus external?
I do. And what I caution against is really having 2 completely different versions of the roadmap. Because telling two different stories to two different audiences is always going to get you into trouble, because they're going to compare notes at some point. The internal version is going to get out at some point. And the fact that they're contradictory is just going to set things up for conflict. So what I prefer is to think about it in terms of level of detail. What details does the specific stakeholder you're talking to now need to know in addition to the high-level story? The high-level story should always be the same. We have a product vision. This is our North Star. This is where we're going. These are the main problems we need to solve along the way. So vision and then the themes that you described. How much additional detail you provide under those themes does depend, I think, on who the audience is. So if you're actually having a planning discussion with engineering, and engineers need to be thinking out 2-3 quarters in terms of architecture, they need to be thinking, oh, I know the features we're working on in this sprint or in the next month or two don't require any new core capabilities, but it looks like you're planning on it over the next several quarters, some things that are going to really hammer our search capability. So we need to think about a new search engine to replace the one that we have. And that's going to take a little while, so let's plan in some time for that. And then we'll be ready for it when the time comes. Now, that level of conversation is really irrelevant to your customer. And it's really irrelevant to your sales team, because it's not, all they care about is that we're going to have greater abilities in the area of search 3 quarters out. They don't care about the details of the features. So you tell the same high-level story, but you leave out the details about features and functions and architecture and infrastructure for the customer audience. You layer on different things like maybe you're going to start talking about pricing because you want to understand how they perceive value. If you're talking to the marketing team, they want to know, what are we going to have to demo at the annual conference next year? Everybody's got their own details, but they all need to hang off the same core story.
Like you're being Oprah, you get a roadmap, and you get a roadmap, and you get a roadmap. You get your own roadmap. Give them crayons and construction paper. They can draw their own. Hey, what do you want it to be?
Oh, and let's talk about this in real practical terms. Lots of roadmaps are in PowerPoint, right? So
yeah.
The first slide that says, this is our product vision, this is where we're headed. You got the second slide that has the themes laid out on the timeline as you described. And then you have a third slide and a fourth and a fifth, each one layering on the details that a specific stakeholder cares about. You got the marketing slide, the sales slide, the engineering slide, and you pick which one of those third slides you show depending on who it is you're talking to.
That's
but the top half of each of those slides should be exactly the same as the slides.
That's a way to have a single set, but have it vary by audience. That's a good tip. Yeah. And the other thing is, I think also when you communicate externally, a big part is there is timing uncertainty. You know, if you know, executive team stakeholders want to like force the team to give a date, then that head of engineering will talk to his team and pad it and give you a date if you really force them to, right? But when you're on the hook with an external roadmap to customers, so one of the techniques I've seen is just to not if you represent on the time axis when the feature is going to get done by like a box or a bar, is to like draw it like kind of like with uncertainty bands and have it be kind of fuzzy. So like the edges aren't like crisp, and so it's like, well, it kind of pokes up into the next quarter a little bit, so we're not quite sure if it's going to be done. You know, it just gives you a little wiggle room. It's kind of an interesting way.
Time frames, I try to get away with as much fuzziness as I can.
Yes.
And the extreme level of that is, it's not a backlog. It is a roadmap. It is technically, at least sequencing, is the now, next, later format. Where you've just got 3 broad buckets and there's no dates on any of them. But you've got the what are we working on now, so you should expect it to come out sooner. What are we working on after that? That's the next bucket. And then the third big bucket is later, which means, yes, it's on our list, but we're not focused on that right now. We're not even planning for that probably yet. So don't expect it. That's useful communication. Whoever is reading this roadmap or talking with you about it is looking at essentially how you value things. And you're saying, we think these things we're working on now are the most valuable, and on down the line. And you can have a conversation with the customer about that, even with only those 3 buckets instead of big, broad time, precise time frames. But even if you do, as people often do, have stakeholders that want dates, you can be fuzzy about it. You can have big, broad dates like quarters, half years, whole years. or seasons, spring of 2019, that kind of thing. I would be as vague as you can get away with, to give yourself more room to get it right, to iterate, to test, to try some things, and or cut some things. And if you keep it to the themes, the problems to be solved, and you keep it to big, broad timeframes, you probably have all of the wiggle room you need to rethink any particular approach to solving those problems.
Drawn in pencil, so you can erase it.
Crayon.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think that technique of bucketing it that way is good, and I think there's actually value in people seeing that it's in the later columns. Just like when you're defining a feature and you say a product, and you say not only do you specify what's in scope, you specify what's out of scope, so that people don't keep asking, what about this? What about this? They can see and know this is not now, it's later. There's a lot of value in that. Yeah. And I think the next thing that'll come up then is like related to this is the question of, well, how far out should we be planning? So like, because if we plan too near term, it's just back to agile backlogs and we're not really getting to that product vision that you mentioned. If we go too far out, then obviously the uncertainty gets bigger and bigger the farther we go out, and we're wasting all this time planning out 3 years when it's all going to change. So what thoughts or advice do you have on that front, Bruce?
I always think of it in terms of the product life cycle. So any given product has a sort of stages that it goes through. In the early stages, you're just trying to get to product market fit, and you're doing a lot of experimentation and a lot of learning. So the order of things on your roadmap, the priorities, and even possibly some aspects of your product vision then are going to change. You may even change which problems you're pointed at, because you discover more things about your client base, about your target market that you didn't know. We realized they had these 3 problems, and we set out to solve them, and they're all on our roadmap. But we found out that they have this 4th problem that if we don't solve it, we can't really capture this market, and we can't really achieve our product vision. So that's a new thing that appears on the roadmap. When your roadmap is in rapid evolution like that, at that early stage, then you want to be thinking in terms of a roadmap that is similarly shorter term, that it should go months rather than years. And then there's usually growth stage where you've hit product market fit and you're just trying to grow the product. And there, your knowledge of which problems you need to solve is better. The resolution of your picture of where you're headed is much clearer. And you can broaden out the timeframes and broaden the length of your roadmap. You can have timeframes that are on the level of the quarter, and you can maybe have a 12-month roadmap or a 4-quarter roadmap. And then there's mature products. They've passed through most of their growth, and they're in more of a mature maintenance kind of stage where they have captured most of the market that they're going to capture. And it's about keeping those customers satisfied and happy, and keeping up with the competition so that you continue to gain the benefit of that business. You continue to satisfy the customer. There, your roadmap might be years long. You might have a 3-year roadmap, but that's the only time I would even consider a 3-year roadmap.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. I think like the analogy I like to think of here is like car headlights in the dark. And it's like, how far out can you see clearly? And as you said, it depends on where you're at. If you're early on with a lot of uncertainty about your target customer and the needs and your value prop, then your headlights are going to go not as far. And if you're really understanding your market, mature part of the product life cycle, you can plan further out. I think that's good. I think the interesting thing I just thought of is, so we said Agile is great at executing in the short term in 2 weeks. And product road mapping is an exercise to get everybody on board with what's important for the longer term, our product vision. One thing I see too sometimes is how do you connect the top level with that detailed Scrum team level? So like the executive team can have a roadmap and everyone be all bought in, but then the team's just kind of doing bottoms up backlog grooming, and it's like, how are those even connected? How do we make sure that they're aligned?
I think of the agile planning process as essentially being kicked off and directed by the roadmap. It's sort of dependent, Now there is hopefully a learning cycle there, so it also informs the roadmap and how it evolves over time. Road mapping is not a one and done exercise either. You should be revisiting it on whatever the cadence is of your roadmap. If it's a quarterly roadmap, you should be updating it at least every quarter. But But to your question, I think the important thing is to be saying, all right, if this is the problem we're trying to solve right now, as described in the theme, what are the ways we can try to solve that problem? And so you're going to be designing your agile iterations or your lean experiments towards solving that problem. What that means is that your theme can't be super vague. It can't be like, oh, let's have a better customer experience. It has to be more specific about the problem you are trying to solve. We want to increase retention or renewal. We want to enter a new market where there are a bunch of problems to be solved for a specific new persona we've never dealt with before. If you can be really specific like that, either in the business objectives or in the problems to be solved for a particular customer, then it's very easy to translate that into, okay, guys, let's have a brainstorming session. What can we do to get where we want to go to solve these particular problems? Let's generate a whole bunch of ideas, and then let's do some rough prioritization on those ideas. Which ones are the most promising we should try to, we should experiment with first. But all pointed at that problem to be solved. And the definition of success isn't we shipped it. The definition of success is we solved the problem.
Right. Yeah, and I think one other thing that comes to mind for me is if you're gonna deck these agile teams, you know, it kind of gets to how your teams are organized. If you've got these themes on your roadmap and you have like say one or more teams devoted, say, let's just simplest case, one team to devote to each theme, then it becomes really easy to tie, you know, they know that, hey, I'm focused on, you know, growing conversion rate, improving conversion rate. So then they can brainstorm all the different ways to do it. Conversely, I've seen teams where you have the roadmap themes, but then their org structure is like, it's really hard to map back. It's like, no, we have the front end team and we have the back end team. And it's like, great, we're trying to improve conversion rate. And now we've got this cross team coordination. So I've seen it, and obviously you don't want to necessarily change your org structure too frequently. And as you mentioned, those themes should be kind of persistent and have a certain amount of duration to them. But anyway, that's something I've seen kind of help or hinder execution of tying the Agile with the roadmap.
Totally. My friend Sam Clemens at Inside Squared, he has a roadmap with 4 swim lanes on it. Each of those swim lanes is a team. Mm-hmm. And each one is tackling a set of problems that are related, and the teams stay steady throughout the year. And I think that his roadmap, reflecting the organizational structure, and the organizational structure reflecting the roadmap and the problems explained on the roadmap, it makes things very simple and easy to execute on.
Definitely, yeah. So to the viewers, if your organization has a roadmap, but you realize that in order to achieve like something in a swim lane, a theme, you've got to coordinate with 1, 2, 3 other teams, then you might want to kind of figure out if there's a better way to organize so that you can be more autonomous as you try to achieve that high level theme.
It's never possible to entirely eliminate dependency.
Sure.
Even if you really did have a very clean separation, roadmap, and mission for each team, it's still possible for Team A to solve problems in a way that makes Team B's problems harder to solve.
Definitely.
There needs to be some level of discussion and coordination.
Yes. Yeah, no, definitely.
Right. But there's a sweet spot there of minimizing it. And the matrix organization is not that sweet spot usually. Right.
Cool. All right. Well, we're getting some questions here through the chat. So let me pull out a couple. One that's timely what you said. I'm glad you mentioned that, you need to update this. We didn't say explicitly, so let's cover it a little more. Is just, hey, assuming you can get your stakeholders, you don't have a roadmap, you say, hey, we listened to this awesome webcast from Bruce and Dan, we need a roadmap, here's why, and you get people bought in, and you go through and you get them to carve out the time and do it. For a lot of places, they just do it once and they put it on a shelf, and then it gets out of date and it gets aged. And so you mentioned that we need to update it. There's a question from one of our viewers about how frequently should we update it. And I guess there's probably an answer of it depends, but how should we think about the right frequency to update our product roadmaps?
It does depend, but usually it's the same advice about how far out should your roadmap go and what should be the buckets on your roadmap. You should be updating it on the same frequency as your buckets. If you've got a quarterly roadmap, you should be updating it every quarter. And the key thing here is that most of the time when you update the roadmap, it shouldn't be viewed as churn. It shouldn't be viewed as failure to predict the future. It should be viewed as we've learned and we've adapted. We tried some things. These worked. These did not work. That informs the future. Some things changed in the competitive landscape. We learned some new things about the customer by experimentation. All of those things inform the roadmap. And rather than having a conversation where you feel like you're being called on the carpet by the executives for having changed your mind, instead you should be having a conversation where you are updating them on everything you've learned and you are making these changes as a responsible member of the team.
Yeah, and I think you focus, something you said very early in our conversation is really important, is so many people focus on, okay, great, we got the roadmap. And now we have this magical document that's the end goal. And I think that something you said is really important is actually the value is not the roadmap itself, it's the process of getting to that agreement with everybody. So it's a way, it's kind of a mechanism or tool to get everybody to agree on what is a longer term vision for our organization.
Well, that's exactly right. I feel the same way about prioritization exercises. We'll go over a few different ways of doing priorities in the workshop, and most of them involve some sort of coordinated effort by multiple parties, by your stakeholders. And the framework for prioritization is which one you choose is less important than that you have one and that you involve everyone. Because these frameworks are nothing more than a way to expose everyone's thinking in a consistent fashion so that you can have an effective conversation about why you think this is more important than that.
Right. Yep. And in fact, we have several questions, and I know it's something that we both are passionate about, great, well, how do you identify the themes or big rocks? How do you prioritize? And I know we have several methods, a couple that I cover in my book. I'll knock those out real quick, and then I'd love to hear the ones from your book too. So my book, I use the importance and satisfaction. One way to prioritize customer value is like for the customer need or problem you're trying to solve, getting a sense of how important it is to your target customer. Whether that's formally, through survey methods, or just use your team, using it as a way to clarify our hypotheses of do we think it's low, medium, high importance, this particular need. And if you're addressing different needs, some will have different levels of importance. And then satisfaction is how satisfied are people with how they're getting that need met today. And then basically you kind of plot those points out, and the more kind of the higher importance and lower satisfaction, the more value you can create for customers by addressing that need.
You come up with a 2x2 grid.
Yeah, 2x2, right. And then the second one I know we both talk about is the Kano model, where which actually comes from lean manufacturing, which I studied before I moved out here to Silicon Valley and got into software, which is a great way to kind of clarify this need that we're trying to deliver for people. Is it a must-have? Is it a performance benefit or a delighter? Where basically performance is the easiest one. Like more, if we deliver more of this benefit, then it's going to create more value. If we deliver less compared to another product, it's going to deliver less value. And must-haves are basically having a must-have doesn't actually make anybody happy, but not having a must-have makes them unhappy. And then delighters are the wow features, where not having it doesn't cause a problem, but having it can create a lot of customer satisfaction. So those are the two prioritization techniques that I talk about I'll be talking about in my workshop and in my book. And I know you've got a lot of other ones in addition to those that you cover.
The book actually has 5 different methods. The Kano method is one of the methods. Another one is critical path, which is, and this is really useful when you are first creating a product, or if you're doing a major rethink of a product. And that is, what are the 1, 2, or 3 extremely small number of things that will make all the difference? Yeah, you probably have a list of 100 things that would be great to have in your product, but what's the one thing that will cause people to buy it versus doing nothing or going with the competition? Solve that problem, solve it deeply, solve it well, over-deliver on that problem before you even think about the rest of the features. Because a lot of the time, people's RFPs, people's feature checklists kind of go out the door when they go, oh, that's such an elegant solution to that problem, I need that. That's one method. There's also feasibility, viability, desirability, which is kind of similar to the 2x2 grid that you described, but the 3, you're looking for the overlap and the strength of the signal on feasibility, can we build it? Viability, can we make money on it? And desirability, does it matter to the customer? Is it important? Those 3. There's also Moscow, which is just really a way of classifying things that must be or should be or could be or won't be. in a particular release of a product. My favorite one is the strategic scorecard. Basically, it's a spreadsheet that allows you to score any given idea, and you can compare features, but I really like comparing problems to solve and potential themes for your roadmap, along how strongly they will solve, help you with your objectives. So if you've got an objective to increase market share, then you rank each one of these themes on whether you think it will help not very much, some, or a whole lot, 0, 1, or 2, high, medium, or low on that goal. And then you do the same with all the other features or themes with your other goals. Usually the thing is, you have multiple goals as an organization, and your market has multiple problems to solve. So if you can prioritize along those methods, and then essentially divide by effort, you can derive a sort of a return on investment score for every one of those themes as to how much they help you with your goals, or how much they're going to cost you. Bang for the buck, essentially, is the purpose of that analysis. That's not as useful when you're just trying to get to product market fit. It's more useful later in the process when you're trying to decide what comes next.
Sounds great. Yeah. So again, we'll be covering our techniques in our workshops at Lean Startup Week. We're at time here, so maybe we can just wrap up with, if you like the topics that we covered today and want to learn more, what are some things you can do? Obviously, in my case, the Lean Product Playbook is out there on hardcover, Kindle audiobook. You can come to the workshop. Your book is about to come out. When's it coming out, Bruce?
It should be out at the end of October, and you can see it on Amazon right now for pre-order. You can also go to productroadmapping.com, and we'll take your email address, and we'll give you A, notification when it's available. B, we'll send you a PDF copy of Chapter 1 right away. So if you're eager to get started, this is the way to do that. And then we also have an assessment checklist where you can assess your own organization on your road mapping process. That's not out yet, but if you put in your email address, we'll notify you when that's available.
That sounds great. So it sounds like the book comes out the week before the conference, so eager people could get it and dive into it before we have the conference. That's great. Yeah, and if you want to learn more about my stuff, it's just my name, Dan-Olsen, OLSEN.com. And I know we're both really excited to meet everyone at Lean Startup Week and interact with folks at our workshops and beyond. And with that, I just want to thank you, Bruce, for all your time here, and we'll throw it back to Felicia to wrap us up. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Thanks to everyone for joining us today. This wraps up our show. Again, Lean Startup Week 2017 is 1 month away. If you're planning on joining us in San Francisco, grab your pass before October 15th to save on our fall sale. Visit leanstartup.co for more information.